The East Los Angeles high school walkouts of 1968 were a pivotal moment in the Chicano movement that demonstrated the power of student-led protest. Thousands of Chicano students refused to attend the segregated and poorly maintained Mexican-American schools that they had been forced into in an attempt to illustrate their resentment of the blatant shortcomings in their educational system. Mexican-American schools at this time were segregated facilities furnished with low-quality learning equipment, inexperienced teachers, and most unjustly a curriculum that focused on teaching of industrial and domestic skills. This type of backwards education almost guaranteed the Mexican-American niche in labor positions, preventing Mexican-American social mobility. The student walkouts of 1968 were a physical manifestation of the frustrations felt by young Mexican students in America and helped to reveal the beginnings of the social struggle for equality and recognition of Chicanos by a new generation of youths. This student movement, however, drew influence from prior events that dramatically impacted the effort for civil equality of minorities. These events included the Watts riots and the Great Boycott of 1965. An interview with Moctezuma Esparza, a key figure in the student walkouts, highlights the origins of the walkouts and provides an explanation for the frustrations of the Mexican-American youth. Esparza notes that there was a very small group of people who organized the walkouts and created the Chicano civil rights movement, but they ignited a firestorm that was ready because that anger was below the surface of thousands and thousands of students. In other words, the walkouts began with the ideas of a minority group of students with a background that granted them the ability to organize the movement. But the movement drew its power from the rallying cry of the thousands of other students and youths that felt this way but were uncertain of how to express their frustration. When asked about the most prominent injustices he faced going to school in the late 60s as a young Chicano, Esparza recalled, "There was the obvious social injustice of living in the country as Chicanos and Mexicanos, all being programmed to become laborers. None of us were being programmed to enter college. There was a realization that the dropout rate was not our own failure, but that of the system, which pre-programmed us. The failure on our part was we bought into it, and we accepted that was all we could do." Chicano youths felt that their tailored education system was confining them to a life as laborers, a position that many generations of Chicanos before them had filled. These youths realized that their chances for social mobility were minimal considering they were withheld a proper education that would avail them social advancement in higher education. So, rather than stay in school, they dropped out and accepted the jobs for which they had been programmed. However, with the surge of anger at their dismal academic conditions came the realization that their failure was not the problem, but rather the system that was setting them up for failure. Chicano students no longer allowed the status quo of the population to claim that they were doing the best they could for a population that really didn't have what it took to succeed, but forced them to look at the blatant faults within their own educational system. These faults are highlighted in the list of demands proposed by the students to the East Los Angeles School Board.
These demands were to be presented to the Los Angeles Board of Education with the expectation that school officials would immediately respond and agree to their petitions. The demands were a representation of the injustices and mistreatment that the students tolerated within their high schools. The proposed demands revealed the lack of resources and attention provided to Chicanos by the school officials. A general trend of the demands was the need to be culturally recognized as Mexican American and the necessity to eliminate discrimination by school officials. One of the demands included a direct request for bilingual education. Bilingual bicultural education will be compulsory for Mexican Americans in the Los Angeles City school system, where there is a majority of Mexican American students. This demand demonstrated the students' desires to have a learning environment that was culturally and linguistically relevant to their lives. Among other demands, students asked for the inclusion of a curricula that would relate to their cultural experiences, stating, "Textbooks and curriculum will be developed to show Mexican and Mexican American contribution to the U.S. society and to show the injustices that Mexicans have suffered as a culture of that society. Textbooks should concentrate on Mexican folklore rather than English folklore. As well as, student body offices shall be open to all students. a high grade point average shall not be considered as a prerequisite to eligibility. These demands exhibit the diminished cultural recognition of Chicanos at the time and reveal that blatant discrimination they experience daily.
Ultimately, the East Los Angeles high school walkouts of 1968 were a bold response to the societal oppression that Mexican Americans faced throughout their daily lives. In the wake of these student protests emerged a critical conscious Chicano community that continues to strive for equality in our present society.
Amigo, ¿qué te pasa? Estás llorando. Seguro es por desdenes de mujeres.